week on Quadriga, anti-Islam protests. A shame for Germany? Anti-Islam protests have mobilized thousands of Germans in recent weeks. They claim to be demonstrating for the preservation of German identity, calling for more restrictive policies on asylum seekers, and demanding the expulsion of foreigners who commit crimes. The rallies are organised by a group calling itself Pegida, an acronym for Patriotic Europeans Against the Islamization of the Occident. Are these protesters driven by genuine concerns about immigration and refugees? Or are they simply expressing entrenched racism and xenophobia? Your host this week, Melinda Crane.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. For the past 2 years, Germany has taken in more asylum seekers than any other country in the world. Yet it long appeared to be one of the few European nations without a rising anti-immigration right wing. Do the Dresden demonstrations signal a change? Or is Pegida an isolated phenomenon? And how should the government respond? That's what we want to talk about today with three people who've been following the events in Dresden very closely. It's a pleasure to welcome Zafer Şenocak. He is a Turkish-born writer who has been publishing poetry, essays, and prose in Germany since 1979. He has taught at leading universities in the US, and he's a regular commentator in German media. And Bettina Gaus is with us. She's a political correspondent for the German daily newspaper Taz, and she formerly headed its parliamentary bureau. She's reported from Africa and has written several books on developments in politics and media since the terrorist attacks of 2001. And finally, a pleasure to welcome Alison Smale. She's New York Times bureau chief in Berlin and a former executive editor at the International Herald Tribune. As deputy foreign editor at the New York Times, she organized much of the paper's coverage of the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan. Bettina Gaus, to many people, these protests, and indeed to many Germans, these protests seem to come out of nowhere. What's behind them and why now?
Well, I think it's difficult to put it in a nutshell. I think basically there is a genuine mood, which is not necessarily racist or extremist. There's a general mood of a growing number of people who feel that they can't get through with their demands, that the world has become more and more complex, and that they feel they have no say in politics anymore. And I think this mood has been capitalized by a right-wing movement and also by a new right-wing party, or Eurocritical party, the so-called Alternative for Germany. It's a Eurocritical and, in my opinion, right-wing party. Basically, they're making use of the mood, which is not necessarily even politically motivated by a number of people, in my opinion.
Zafer Şenocak, one of the puzzling thing about these protests, which are essentially protesting what they call Islamization, is that they are occurring in a city that has actually taken in fewer Muslim refugees than many other places in Germany. Very few Germans in general, and especially very few people in Dresden, have actually had contact with Muslim refugees. So what's behind that?
We don't want to have more. That's very easy. They want to stay among themselves, and Islam is at this moment, very easy enemy, I would say. I mean, if you look to the pictures coming from the Islamic world, problems in the Islamic culture, it's very easy to mobilize people against it and to generalize. But I think the mood, the problem with this mood, I agree absolutely. There is a kind of mood against changement, against insecurity, the way how politics function, Brussels, and so on. This mood is not superficial. That's the problem. I would say this mood is very deep. And it comes really from the deepness of our common Western European history. We have to talk about it. If we really solved every problem, in living together with differences after 45 on this continent? This is a big question.
So both of you telling us people feeling uncertain, feeling threatened. Alison Smale, you've traveled to Dresden several times. You've covered the protests. You yourself described the city as culturally rich and prosperous. And indeed, that's true of Germany as a whole. The country has been doing economically quite well, slipping a bit now perhaps. But why would people here be feeling so threatened?
Well, I think it does go back to what Bettina and what you have identified. And that is a mood where people feel that their wishes have been ignored, their feelings have been ridden over. This is why they've appropriated, which, for people who remember 1989 and the anti-communist protests, this chant of Wir sind das Volk, we are the people, has a certain meaning. And it sends a little bit of a frisson through them to hear it taken over for a different cause. But I have to say that when I was in the demonstrations in Dresden, that chant is the one powerful thing. That's more powerful than anything else, at least in the couple of times that I've seen. If you try to talk to people who are protesting, some of them don't want to talk to the media at all and have sort of cut themselves off and said, you are just ignore us or you lie about us. And they do resent the sort of far-right or neo-Nazi label being put on them, and it's pretty obvious looking at these people that they're not neo-Nazis. Not all of them, by any means. And so they have sort of cut themselves off, and that reinforces this sense of we're being ignored. Never mind that the three biggest talk shows in Germany, aside from this one, dedicated themselves to Pegida last week, and nobody from this movement, Pegida, although invited, decided to come. So it is a bit of a question. As things go forward, I'm not sure that Pegida can just rely on, oh, well, this week we have 10,000, now we have 15,000, perhaps next Monday it'll be 20. I'm not sure that the numbers game works particularly well. Maybe they have to articulate something soon.
Bettina Gaus.
I would like to refer to the use of the word neo-Nazis. I quite agree. Of course, those people taking part in the demonstrations, they are not what our picture of a neo-Nazi looks like. I mean, they are not hooligans in their overwhelming majority. There are some, but they are not violent. They seem to come from the middle class, and they may even come from the middle class, which doesn't mean, I mean, all sorts of scientists have stated over and over the years that there is a certain conservatism which tends to go to the right even, saying, yes, there is resentment against everything which appears to be foreign, which is not like the way we used to be. So I think even if they don't look like neo-Nazis or don't fit the image of the classical neo-Nazis, I think it's a right-wing movement, and one shouldn't. But I also would like to add one more point. I think we should, me included, all be careful always talking about the people. Yeah. Let's remind us of the fact that even if it's 15,000, and even if the number is growing, we had 1 million demonstrating against cruise missiles in the beginning of the 80s. And nobody was of the opinion that the society is changing radically and drastically. It's still a very, very small minority of the people. And even if this new party, if there were elections tomorrow, even if this new party were elected, they would get something like 6%, which means 94%. Would not vote for them. I think that is also important to stress.
But we all know that there are people with sympathies in all parties, I would say, with this movement. And this is the danger. I mean, I don't count the people on the street. I don't think that this is very important. Much more important is this background, this hidden background. I mean, Mr. Sarrazin, who wrote this famous book, you know, he is a social democrat.
Berlin politician who wrote a book basically expressing very anti-immigrant sentiments.
I would say a lot of people have also sympathies there. So it's much more complicated. It's not an issue of left or right. I think it's a cultural issue, and we have really to look in, because in the beginning of the century we had this idea of a superior white Western world, which was controlling the world.
At the beginning of the 20th century.
At the beginning of the 20th century. And now, this is the crisis of this superiority. You know, and all the reaction to the immigration, to the other color, to the other religion, to other regions are coming from this, I would say, because it's also in France, for example, which is a country with a big tradition of republicanism and openness to other people. But it's a big crisis also in France, because especially because we are not thinking about the connections between this and to the how it functions to the others.
You have written a book called Deutschsein, Being German, that looked into German identity. What aspect of their identity are these protesters worried about losing?
I will pick one of these issues. I think that there is a kind of bourgeois crisis in Germany. I mean, in general, in the West, there is a kind of bourgeois crisis. This is what I want to express, that in the beginning of 20th century, for migrants and for the other cultures, there was a kind of a road climbing up, you know, to the Western culture. I'm born in Turkey, and Turkey is a very good example for this. I mean, modernization was westernization. You had a model, a role model. And this role model doesn't function more like in the beginning of 20th century. In Germany, it was destroyed all. I mean, you know, the history, it was destroyed. And if you don't have a very strong middle class with a role model bringing to others, you cannot come up with an assimilation program. And all those people who are now on the streets have this assimilation program in their heads. They want the other to disappear with its differences. Okay, and this is not possible more. So we have this problem here.
And now perhaps let's link that up to the particular region where these protests are occurring, because this is, of course, Eastern Germany, where people have seen massive transition in the past 25 years, and where clearly many, many people saw their jobs fall away, their livelihoods break down. Alison Smale, to what extent is this an Eastern German phenomenon? It's occurring in a region that was once known as the Valley of the Clueless, because people there could not receive West German TV. Is that what's really behind this?
When I went to Dresden, I found people who were prepared to say it was a little bit the result of this lack of exposure to West German media throughout the time of communism. Other people said, no, that's not the determining factor. Fact is that East Germans in general had far fewer confrontations with immigrants. And by confrontation, I don't mean something violent. I just mean actually interaction. There weren't very many. There were a few. There were some Vietnamese, in essence, guest workers. They called them something else. But really not a lot of interaction. So maybe that does play a part. Politics in the eastern part of Germany are still more febrile than the politics in the western part of Germany, because there is this difference in development. So the fact that Alternative for Germany, this new party which strikes an anti-Euro but also slightly populist and maybe anti-integration tone, they did well in elections for 3 state parliaments, all in eastern Germany. But I don't think that yet signals that they have a nationwide appeal. And it's not quite clear what connection, if any, there is to Pegida. One of the leaders of this new Alternative for Germany went to the demonstration this past Monday, but he didn't take part in the walk through Dresden. Clearly, people are sort of feeling, is there a new political movement here? But I honestly think the jury is out, and I take Bettina's point that we're not talking about a vast majority of people. It's obviously, though, a debate that has touched a nerve. And if it's touched this much of a nerve, and the political establishment here in Berlin is wondering how do we address this, then something has been left unspoken or untreated in this society.
But what I find really disquieting is the fact that there is not even a debate. You mentioned it, some of the, or quite a number of the people who are out on the streets refuse to talk to the media, saying you are lying and you ignore us, which basically means you're lying, basically means you print editorials which do not reflect our opinion. So as long as it doesn't reflect my own opinion, the counterpart is lying, fine. But there is no debate. As you said, the panels, the talk shows, whoever, they don't even take part. So everybody else, like we do now, is thinking, what could be their motives? What do they want? Whatever they say on the surface sounds so nice. We don't mind genuine refugees. We like the people who abide by the law. And there is a subtext, and everybody understands the subtext. The subtext means we don't like foreigners. But you can't prove it. And as long as they don't participate in the debate, as long as they can say, well, we knew you would be lying about us and you misunderstand us deliberately. And I think that's a real danger.
Yes. Poll, for example, a few months ago among people living in Eastern Germany, and the result was, I think, quite shocking. I mean, people saying GDR, it was much more secure.
The old East Germany.
Yeah, so it looks so nice, this country, I mean, this GDR, somehow in this polls, and nobody is connecting results of this polls with, for example, this moment. I think it's very much connected, because it's a kind of rejection of the open society. It's a kind of rejection of the insecurity which comes with the open society. It's a kind of rejection of mixture. And this is what we have to discuss. Maybe some people in Europe, in the world, doesn't want to mix so much. So they have the right, of course, to express it. We sound to be named as Nazis or fascists or something like this. They have to express it. And the others who want to live in mixed areas have to express also why they want to live in mixed areas more. And so we have maybe a cultural debate. But we live in an open society, and I think it's time to defend this open society also.
I want to come back to this question of political disaffection in just a moment, because we do have voices from the protesters and I'd like to listen to them. And interestingly enough, Alison Smale mentioned that the protesters have co-opted the slogan that many East Germans chanted as they were seeking to bring the wall down, namely, Wir sind das Volk, we are the people. And that is not the only way that the protesters have attempted to link their movement to the protests that brought down the Berlin Wall. Let's take a look.
Pegida stages its rallies on Mondays, an overt reference to the popular uprising against the East German regime 25 years ago. The organisers claim to express the concerns of a German society they feel is being overrun by Muslims.
We are patriots, we love our fatherland, we love our country, and we want to protect it.
It starts with Islam instruction in schools and 1,000 other things. They have it all thought out. But the real problem is our politicians. The state is helpless. It cheats and lies to its own citizens.
So, Bettina Gaus, there you have it, the political disaffection that you mentioned. You have written a book about the end of the democratic culture of debate. Do they represent the end or a revitalization?
Well, I think, if at all, they represent the end, since they don't, as mentioned, they don't participate in a debate. But the book you mentioned predominantly dealt with West German politics. And I would also I wished it was true what we were saying, that basically it's confined to Dresden and they couldn't watch West German TV and all this. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that they wouldn't start gaining more and more success as time moves on, even in the West. And also this new party we have mentioned several times now. In the state of Hessen, they got, if I remember correctly, 4.7% of the votes the first time they applied for the elections, and that was just a few months after the party had been founded.
Well, and they didn't do so badly nationally, actually.
And they didn't do so badly nationally. So I would be very careful in linking it too closely only to the East German part of...
I just think in its specific form that it has come
I agree.
Up now.
I don't disagree. But
I agree that we...
but I think...
The interesting thing is, does it actually spread?
Yeah.
But I think that there's a problem, because I'm a typical Westerner. I mean, I grew up in West Germany, and I identify myself very much with this Bonner Republic, I must say. I think it's time to discuss that we lost a lot of things which was very common in Western Germany, in this unified Germany. And we have also to talk about it. For instance, the way how to debate. This is something that I will absolutely connect it to this issue. And also to express a kind of model which is open society, which is very aware of its enemies. I mean, open society has always enemies. This is a very normal issue. It is everywhere. This, and if the problem starts, or it becomes dangerous when you don't see it more. That there are enemies. You know, you feel too secure, and everything is solved, and suddenly you are surprised that not everything is solved. There is a kind of.
I agree entirely, and I think the freedom of the press is a very good example. That is, whereas I am saying it may spill over to West Germany, and it's not an East German phenomenon as such, but I think this idea that the press is free to say whatever they want to say within the law, that is a feeling where I sometimes am under the impression that part of East Germany, only a minority, but they basically disagree. As I said, if we don't print what they like to be seen printed, they would like it to be censored. They don't agree with the concept, small minority, but this minority doesn't agree with the concept of free speech. And that's something which has become more acceptable even in West Germany. I think that's an influence. It was not acceptable in the Bonner Republic.
Now, all of you have said that this uncertainty, this sense of being threatened in their very identity, is something that is being instrumentalized and exploited. Alison Smale, as I mentioned, has traveled to Dresden. You met the instigator of these protests, at least the apparent instigator,
yes, well,
Lutz Bachmann. Tell us a bit about him. You know, you said it was a motley crew, many ordinary people, but he's no ordinary person.
Well, I mean, I have not done a personal investigation into his background, but the local newspaper, the Sächsische Zeitung, turned up quite a long police record, convictions for burglary. I think still on probation for alleged dealing in cocaine once. But he sort of, that had just come out the day I was in Dresden, and so he faced up to that by saying, yes, I too have a past, I have atoned for it, it's in the past, and, you know, but I'm quite willing to step out of the unwanted spotlight, as he put it, if you no longer feel that you want me. It's not clear how he and other people at the sort of the head of the line of people filing through Dresden, how did they get together? How did they sort of associate? But he himself, you know, he was very eager to tell the New York Times that, in really quite good English also, that they were not against immigrants per se, that this was not an anti-foreigner movement. And so, I mean, that's what I reported, because that's what he told me.
But that's what I meant with the subtext.
Of course, but
it's hypocrisy, in my opinion.
Well, I think it weaves together all the points that we've touched on. And what I think basically is these people are sort of dying for the certainties of old times. And the certainties of old times in this particular context means the kind of, you know, rigidity that of daily life under communism. I think what they've forgotten is how boring it was, but...
So, Zafer Şenocak, do they have a program? Is there something that they clearly want politicians to do? And if so, what is it?
Well, they pointed out, I think it's 19 points, or how much is it? You can read it on the internet. It's very close, I think, to the program of the AfD, in fact.
The Alternative for Germany.
Eurosceptical party we've mentioned.
Yes, close in that sense is, for example, they want a kind of immigration law. It's very interesting because immigration law, this was an unword for the conservative Germans. I mean, if you look to the Christian Democrat Party, even today, if you talk about immigration law, oh my God, no, immigration law, we are not an immigration country. I mean, this was the creator of this country over decades. They talk about the Canadian model for the immigration law. But interesting thing is that Canada is the par example for a multicultural society and country. I mean, from the policy, so they hate the multicultural society, but they say that they want to adopt the Canadian model for immigration. A lot of contradictions. And I don't think that this is so important, the program. The mood is much more important at this moment. And this mood, I don't think that a lot of people will go on streets in Western Germany and so on, but a lot of people have a kind of sense for this danger of losing the culture ground. I mean, this, you know, even this culture ground which comes, for example, women's rights. Women's rights is a lot of this discussion that even in this movement there are anti-feminist sentiment. They start to defend women's rights when it goes to the Islamic culture. And of course there is a problem with this issue. So we have a lot of cultural topics.
Bettina Gaus, until now, Germany really has not had a far-right xenophobic party along the lines of, say, the Front National in France. Could this mood, could this movement be the beginning of one?
It could be. But this does not necessarily mean that it would be, I don't think it will be as successful as, let's say, the Front National or even other anti-xenophobic parties or Eurocritical parties. I think it will. I think they stand a very good chance of being voted into parliament next time, if they don't have too much inside quarrels among themselves. But I don't necessarily see it as the upstart of a mass movement. And I think also, again, looking at numbers, I'm very much in favor of demonstrations, and I've participated in quite a number of them during my life. But that does not mean that an elected government or an elected parliament should react to any movement immediately and say, oh, there are people on the street, now we have to change politics. Sorry, they were elected by millions and millions and millions of voters who are not on the streets. Therefore, I resent this feeling of, oh, we have to understand what their goals are, and now we have to change our policy, which comes from some of the Christian Democrats.
Let's take a look at what the politicians have been saying. Let's hear a few of politicians' reactions.
In Deutschland gibt es zwar
In Germany, we have the freedom to demonstrate, but this is no place for rabble-rousing and defaming people who come to us from other countries. So each individual should take care not to be instrumentalized by the organizers of such events.
Most of our society understands that refugees have lost everything and is ready to help them and welcome them to our country. Those are the values of the Christian Occident, not demonstrating in the streets against people who have lost everything. There is no real danger of our country being Islamized. There are millions of Muslims living here in Germany, who work here, who pay their taxes here, and who are good neighbors to us.
Zafer Şenocak, are you satisfied with what you're hearing from the politicians?
Great, rational, pragmatic policy. It's fantastic, isn't it? I mean, we wanted to open the society. In fact, I think the last majority of the politicians in the different parties, because there are demographic needs. I mean, Germany, in future, the population is shrinking, so you need this immigration from outside. That's very clear. And you need also... Have the politicians made
that clear enough? Have the politicians really spelled that out?
In the last year, a lot of things changed, yeah. Merkel is... The Chancellor is a very good example, I think, for this. I mean, she's leading this conservative party, Christian Democrat Party, and she changed a lot, I would say, to be more open to this question. And also now she's very clear,
so
making a distance.
Why isn't it getting through?
But what's going on in the population? That's the other question. I mean, this is the agenda of the politicians. This is the agenda of this the state raising. But what's going on in the ground? A lot of people are not even going to vote. I mean, they have 40%, 50% people not voting. So the number for a new party can increase immediately enormously if this party can reach this non-voters. Immediately. And so I don't think that politicians in majority understood really the danger now. So it's very, very important to create a discussion forum or an atmosphere of cultural exchange about the situation in the country, not only with foreigners, not only with the one who came into Germany, but also with the ones who live here very long and who are Bio-Germans.
I beg to differ on one point. I think the conservatives, Christian Democrat, Christian Socialist Democrats, they have seen the danger ever since the AfD, the new party, has been founded. And that's why they are sending a twinkle to the ones, some of them, to the ones who go on the street now. They try to maintain the superiority in the right wing or in the conservative part of the population. And I mean, okay, the quotes you have been showing are, in my opinion, totally acceptable, but there have been other quotes. The Minister for Interior said that the people who take to the streets in Dresden are just worried citizens who are ready to meet the challenges of the present. Sorry, does the Minister for Interior really want to say the challenge for the present is the Islamization of Europe? This is, I'm sorry, this is ridiculous. We are not about to forbid alcohol in Bavaria or to introduce the Sharia in Lower Saxony. And I think that is a way of phrasing it which is populistic, which says, well, we do understand and accept your demands, and purely for the reason because they don't want to lose the electorate towards
Alison
this
Smale,
new party.
Does that perhaps represent the possibility that at least that segment of the Conservative Party, the Chancellor's Party, the CDU and CSU, possibly might want to shift the big tent rightward in order to keep people who are disaffected within it?
Well, I mean, I think that the mantra on Merkel is that she has moved her party towards the center and that she has taken over several issues that were more traditionally seen as being those issues of the center left, the Social Democrats. If you do that, if we postulate that that's true, I'm not sure it totally is, honestly, then indeed you are leaving room on the right. On the right, traditionally, the Bavarian Christian Social Union fulfilled the role of capturing a more conservative stream. Even for people who didn't live in Bavaria, they felt, well, they're there too, so they're kind of representing my view.
And those are precisely the ones who are saying, we need to listen to these people. Is that populist pandering, or do they have a point?
No, I mean, I just think that the Christian Social Union performs a very certain function, and somehow that function is actually not being performed in quite the way it traditionally was under a much stronger leader, Franz Josef Strauss, which is going back some time now, but still. So I think that it has to do with a lot of complicated dynamics of politics. And the accusation or the comment on Merkel is that somehow she has killed off politics. No. I mean, clearly not. There's too much discussion of politics and of attitudes here to be able to assert that at all. But I do think what is going on is it's a changing world. In every single society, we see the impact of much more smashing together of people, much more mobility than human beings have ever known in their history before. And that makes it very hard for people to decide, for everybody. I mean, this is a decision that we all face. What is my identity? I mean, if people ask me, where am I at home? I have not lived in my country since 1979. So where is home? My husband is Russian. Our daughter was born in Vienna. And those are very different experiences than people who grow up in one town, marry in one town, have their children there, they possibly go to the same schools that their parents went to. This is a different way of life. And we've talked a great deal about wealth divergence in our societies, which is indeed increasing. But what I don't think we've talked about a lot is the difference between people who naturally kind of live an international life, and frankly a privileged one, and people who don't, and then other people who are forced to leave their homes to adopt a new homeland. I mean, I've done a lot of reporting on refugees too.
This description, yeah.
And this is the issue.
It is.
Sorry, perhaps you can add your thought to an answer to the following question. Some left-leaning commentators in Germany have said, look, what we actually need is a real communications offensive from the politicians, reminding people we have become an immigration country, and coupled with that, programs to promote more contacts between the kind of Germans you're describing, people who have stayed in one place, who perhaps have never met a migrant. Fully 95% of Germans say they have had no contact to an asylum seeker. That's astonishing. Would that help?
This is very pedagogic, I mean, very German, I would say, to think that you can organize contacts. We had this day of the foreigner in September to mingle and to meet. No, I think the idea that there are on the earth people with very, very different life experiences. And the first moment is, or the first starting point is, that you accept the other life model. Mm-hmm. Is it possible? I mean, can I accept some person who says, I'm very much bound to my earth, I am on this earth, I want to stay here, I don't want to move? Can I accept this? Can he accept me going around the world, living in different communities, talking? This is a very big question. And I think at this moment, we have in Europe a kind of, not only in Germany, in Western Europe, we have a kind of a movement towards being a larger Switzerland. We have a Swiss model in the head that small entities, people can decide more, and can also say no.
Well,
you know, to developments.
Since the European Union has expanded and people say they feel more cut off, is that people are much more ready to identify with their region or the customs of exactly where they live. Or, you know, they may even travel internationally all week, but going to the market in their particular hometown is very important on Saturdays. So everybody's got to find ways of mingling.
We need a balance.
But Zafer Şenocak, if you described the initiative that I mentioned as pedagogic, how would you promote the kind of tolerance and acceptance that you're talking about?
I would say that people need also distance. They don't have to mingle so much together. I mean, what's the problem? We have to talk more in an easygoing way about these issues. You know, we are very serious when it's going on in this question of migration and so on. Humor is very important in this. You must really bring more humor in this discussion, and you must also take other people serious. I mean, life stories. This is very important.
Familiarity with people's other culture, history, and so on. I mean, I think if you look honestly, in Germany, there's been a reunification. It's interesting because it's different than any other of the former Soviet bloc countries, because basically the West Germans came and it was their model that got taken over. In every other place, it's got to come from within the society. I mean, there is no West Czechia to come in and sort of take over the Czech Republic. But what we haven't seen a great deal of, honestly, and as somebody who's covered a lot of Eastern Europe for many, many years, I'm still astonished by how little Western Europeans know about Eastern Europeans, and Eastern Europeans know much more about the West than vice versa.
That's a question of power. I mean, the more powerful, and the West has been more powerful, always know less about the less powerful than vice versa. But I think I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying. We don't have to mingle that much. I think we don't have to befriend each other all the time. It's quite
to respect each other.
It would do nicely if we didn't kill and attack and discriminate against each other. That's perfect.
And you're not worried that what Germans would call parallel worlds, parallel societies, actually would stoke the kind of resentments we're seeing?
Well, it may, if tolerance and respect is not emphasized. But I don't mind a parallel society very much, as long as everybody has some common ground, such as, for instance, the Constitution, the law. All this needs to be respected. But I don't mind. I don't mind people following a different culture or having different eating habits or talking amongst themselves in their language. Why not?
And you're not worried that putting a house of 14 Tunisian refugees in a suburb of Dresden and allowing them to go about their way with little contact to the people around them could be a recipe for further unrest, for further misunderstanding and even violence?
Not in this number. What does worry me, but in this, it has got nothing to do with Pegida. Even if those demonstrations didn't take place, I think some changes should take place. It is not a very good idea to put a large number of refugees coming from, being all traumatized, coming from various war zones, who are not even all a community, but who also don't really share the same language, the same culture whatsoever, to house hundreds of them in a suburb where people have not been exposed to foreign cultures. That is something which necessarily creates tension. And I think in the question where the refugees, and I'm very much in favor of accepting more refugees into Germany. I think the numbers saying, oh, we have enough. Sorry, there is war all over the world. And we should accept more refugees, but we should also at the same time put more thought in how to house them, how to, whether to let them work or not.
I think there does need to be a European level discussion about this, because it's certainly true that Germany and Sweden have proven the most open to taking refugees from the Middle East conflict.
Well, Turkey?
No, I'm saying within the European Union. Definitely, no. The countries around Syria and Iraq have done a remarkable job of absorbing, without actually that much violence, millions of people.
Very, very briefly, because we're very close to the end of the show. Does Germany have the asylum and immigration policy that it needs, or does it need to change?
No, it needs an immigration policy. It has an asylum policy, but it doesn't have an immigration policy. It needs an immigration law, I think. Definitely.
Meaning?
Meaning making it clearer for people what's the future, how it will look. More clear, if it's possible.
For Germans and for the immigrants themselves?
Absolutely. Both of them.
Thank you very much to all of you for being with us today. And thanks to all of you out there for tuning in. And we wish you happy holidays and see you soon.